we are talking cesarean traps. I know it has been the long awaited series, and we're going to dive in. So there are 21 that I listed, and I'm going to do the first 5 today. Some of these you wouldn't see as a trap. What are natural birth traps and cesarean traps? These are the things inside of the medical system and in our birth culture that undermines your confidence to give birth. It makes you think that you can't do it, that your body is broken. If you've already had one or more cesareans, then what happens is that you may have fallen into more than one of these traps. So I'm listing them specifically so that you can recognize them when they come up and get out of them. Because this is the thing about our maternity care and our culture, is that these things are so mainstream, they're so commonplace that you don't even see them coming as a trap that's going to derail your birth. You just think this thing is happening and now my birth plan is out the window and now I have to do this. Or you start to doubt yourself, you doubt your ability to birth, and then your care provider will take advantage of that either intentionally or unintentionally with just the way that they are doing things in the system. You have to remember that the medical system is based on the idea that your body is defective and broken, and birth has become pathologized as a medical event instead of a physiological one. We don't need a doctor to tell us when we need to sneeze or go to the bathroom or when we're tired or when we're hungry. But with birth, suddenly we have now thought that it can't happen without a care provider present. And I'm just going to tell you that this is complete crap, because when you see all of these sensationalized stories where a mother was planning to go to the hospital, but she didn't make it in time, guess what happens? She births her baby. Or you see somebody who intentionally had an unassisted birth. Well, the fact is that you, even if you were planning to go to the hospital, if you went into labor very quickly, you could birth your baby unassisted. This is why one of my things that I teach my clients is that even if they're planning to go to the hospital, we do have a backup plan in place for an unassisted birth, because you never know. In fact, with myself, I planned to have a home birth and I wanted a midwife there. I wanted a doula there. But because of the way that my labor was going, and because I knew that there were restrictions and my midwife had her hands basically tied behind her back and that she couldn't do anything, I had to choose. Do I want my birth or do I want to make the midwife comfortable? And I chose me. That's one of the things about having an empowered birth, is that you're choosing you. You're choosing your birth experience over everybody else's expectations. And I'm just going to say that is really, really hard to do until you have the 5 pillars of empowerment, which I've said before is the right mindset, the right education, the right environment, the right facilitators, and the right support. And when you have all 5, then you can step into your confidence and you can get the birth you want without having to fight, beg, or compromise. So today, as I said, we're going to be talking cesarean traps. But if you want to know more about these traps and about what an empowered birth entails and how to get one and how to create that birth experience and that you're dreaming of, then I invite you to download my book, Your Empowered Birth. It's available at my website. You just go to empoweringmomsbirth.com/book. All of these things are really important for you to know, because I'm just going to tell you the medical system is not going to tell you these things. Sometimes they aren't even aware that what they're doing is setting you up to fail, because fish can't see water. And they've been indoctrinated into the medical system, and they see things and they see birth not working over and over and over again. And then that colors their mindset and makes them think that your birth is a disaster waiting to happen, especially if you happen to be in a category where you would be more likely to have a C-section, especially if you're an older mom and it's not because your body is broken and defective, it's just because of the bias. It can happen if you happen to be smaller, like a smaller pelvis, smaller frame. I could have been pushed into a C-section. If you have a larger frame, if you happen to have a high body mass index, they'll push a C-section for that. if you happen to be having a big baby, and I just gave away the first one, they're going to push on that too. They're going to push you into a C-section because in their mind, nobody's going to sue for a C-section because C-sections have been seen as life-saving. So, as I said, we're talking cesarean traps this month, and this is really important information that you're probably not going to get in mainstream childbirth education because oftentimes they're teaching the exact opposite. So, what are cesarean traps 1 through 5? Well, the first one I already hinted at, it's a big baby. In fact, this is one of the biggest things that I see in the mom groups. And there's actually an article written by Evidence-Based Birth, Rebecca Decker. She writes about what is the evidence for a cesarean or induction for a big baby. The truth, there isn't much. In fact, one of our Empowered Birth community members ended up having a home birth after cesarean with an 11-pounder. So if she can do it with an 11-pound baby, your 9-pound baby or 8-pound baby that your doctor's trying to scare you with, probably not a big deal. And we've had several stories where moms have had big babies at home with no complications. In fact, the whole fear of a big baby is completely unfounded. And it's based on the idea that you would have problems birthing this baby because they would have shoulder dystocia, which means that the baby would get their shoulders stuck. Now, this isn't true though, because oftentimes a lot of what's done in maternity care leads to babies getting stuck. If you're flat on your back, your pelvis is more constricted than if you're able to move freely. If you're on your hands and knees, your pelvis is open. If your knees are closed inward instead of outward, that is also going to allow your baby to be able to pass through your pelvis. And it seems counterintuitive because your legs are together, but it opens the pelvic outlet so that your baby can come out. In fact, there's videos that you can see about this. And a lot of times, what do you see is that you're trying to push and your doctor is telling you to keep your legs wide open, or they even have the nurse hold your legs wider apart. And that, plus being on your back, can lead to your baby getting stuck. So you see where the problem is. The other thing is that with a big baby, your care provider's fear of the big baby can cause more problems and more intervention than an actual big baby. If you're physiologically birthing a big baby, then your body is going to naturally signal for you to get into certain positions to help that baby out. But because birth has become heavily controlled and it's become this big thing of fear, and because C-sections are now so easy to do, now when you're having a big baby, well, they're just going to push you into a C-section, especially if you're attempting to have a VBAC, because then they'll say your baby has to be under a certain weight in order for you to have a successful VBAC. Well, again, this client just had a home birth after cesarean and with an 11-pounder. So I don't know what to tell you on that one. I'd say that maybe you want to do a little bit more questioning when it comes to your doctor telling you that your baby's too big for you to birth vaginally. There's no such thing. Now, I will preface that by saying that if your baby happens to be big because of gestational diabetes or chronic diabetes, like if that's the case, then sometimes their shoulders and their chests are larger, but their head is still the same. And again, this is if the diet is uncontrolled and there's a lot of sugar and it's just the makeup of the baby. But when they're doing studies about big babies, often what happens is they lump everything together because they need to get a certain sample size so the data gets skewed. So big baby, not a reason to be scheduling a C-section. And if they say, well, your baby was 8 pounds or 9 pounds, and that's why you weren't able to birth them, and that's why you had a C-section, I would really question that because, again, there are moms who have had C-sections for babies that were supposed to be big, and then they went on to have VBACs with babies that were much bigger, and their labors were a lot easier. So it wasn't that. The next one You go the other way, a small baby. Now, a small baby is also often a reason that they'll tell you you need to have a C-section, or they'll say you need to induce. Now, this is something that actually happened to me with my own pregnancy with my son, is that I was measuring smaller at 35 weeks, and they tried very hard to convince me that he was not growing properly. But I trusted my intuition, and I'm also really good and stubborn. And when I don't want to do something, I find every loophole that I possibly can. So my loophole was going for non-stress tests twice a week and going for bi-weekly ultrasounds to be able to figure out if my son was still growing and if he was healthy. And as long as he was healthy, I was not inducing, I was not having a C-section. I was just not doing it. So I probably really frustrated the hell out of that OB, who was hoping that I would just follow the recommendations. But the thing is that I don't. And I teach my clients how to stand in their own truth so that they're able to tell their care provider, thank you, but we won't be inducing. Thank you, but I won't be scheduling a C-section until I feel that it's necessary. And they're able to stand strong even when their care provider is trying to scare them, because of the tools that I've taught them how to use them, and the questions to ask, and the mindsets to shift into, and to be able to really feel strong and confident in saying no, even when everybody around them is saying you should just listen to your doctor. So the thing about the small baby, though, is that oftentimes your care provider will say, well, we need to induce, because that way your baby can be on the outside, and then they can get their milk, and then they'll be fed properly. Basically telling you that your body is insufficient at feeding and nourishing your baby. Now, the thing is that true intrauterine growth restrictions, usually there's other complications involved in that. So if you don't have any of those other complications, you could just have a small for gestational age baby. And the way that they basically tell you that your baby is too small is they're going by percentiles. And percentiles just mean the average of the size of the babies in that population. So if you happen to be someone of a different ethnicity, or you happen to be in a population where everybody seems to have massive babies, suddenly your baby is in the second percentile for growth compared to all these really big babies. And the other one is if you happen to be in a population where there's smaller size babies, oftentimes because they're being induced early, or because of maybe that's just the genetic makeup. What happens again is now you're being told your baby is in the 95th percentile for growth, and that scares the crap out of you. But percentiles, throw them out the window, because you are an individual and so is your baby, and they're on their own growth curve. So when they say that your baby is too small for dates, that could technically mean that your baby has longer time that they need to catch up in growth. And this is what happened to me, is that my son, he had his head growing at the faster rate, and then his body caught up at 39 weeks. I have the stretch marks to prove it. I had absolutely no stretch marks at all until my 39th week, when he just suddenly shot up in growth, and then like my belly just grew overnight. So the other one, though, is that I've seen a lot of 42 and 43 week mamas who have babies that are 5 and 6 pounds. So when you hear that, when you think about a baby that's only 5 or 6 pounds at 43 weeks, when they're finally ready to come, what would happen if you induced that mother at 39 weeks because they said that the growth was not where it was supposed to be? Well, that baby might be 4 pounds or 3 pounds, definitely not ready to be born. But because of the way that the medical system has basically pathologized birth and said you have to go into labor by a certain point and everybody has to follow this timeline, if you fall off of it, they're going to push induction, and induction leads to C-sections. Sometimes they might even say that your baby's not going to even tolerate labor and you need to have a C-section. You have the C-section, you find out that your baby is premature. Or the other one is you wait until 40 weeks and then you have your baby, but you find out that your baby was not that small. Your baby was actually 8 pounds. So I ended up avoiding a C-section and avoiding an induction. But I was told repeatedly from 35 weeks onwards that my baby was too small. And I did have a small belly, and it was not on schedule with what they thought that the growth was supposed to be. I carry my babies in my back. So I have a tiny, cute little round belly. And unfortunately, that made me measure smaller. So they kept saying, well, you're still behind in growth. But I was stubborn, and then I ended up pushing out an almost 8-pound baby. So again, big baby, small baby, not a reason to automatically schedule a C-section or an induction. The next one, and this is another big one, is being labeled high risk without actually knowing what that means. So here's the thing about high risk that absolutely drives me crazy, and it's something that I see quite often, and it's what I help my clients wrap their heads around. Because a lot of the women that come to me, they are labeled high risk. They have high blood pressure. They happen to have gestational diabetes. They happen to have regular diabetes. They happen to have had more than one cesarean. They happen to have a cesarean. They happen to be older, so they're over 35. All of these things contribute to them being called high risk. I've even had moms who have a higher body mass index. But the thing is that these labels automatically put you in a category where the doctor's like, you're broken until proven capable. And they don't see you as being capable of birthing your baby without intervention. However, the reality is that you could probably birth your baby without intervention. It's the bias of the medical system and the bias of our culture that is leading to you thinking that you are high risk and you can't do it. And you therefore have to put restrictions on yourself. Maybe you want a VBAC, but they say because you're high risk, you have to come to the hospital immediately as soon as you go into labor. Or they say because you're high risk, you're going to have to be on the monitor the whole time. Or because you're high risk, you have to go into labor by 39 weeks or it's an automatic C-section. Or because you're high risk, we're going to have to induce your labor by a certain point so that you don't go over. But again, you need to be able to sit with that and be like, am I really high risk? Because the truth is that that label may not actually mean anything at all. And this is what was true for Jenny. And this was also true for one of our other clients in the empowered birth community who just had her home birth after cesarean. This was true for Lisa. This was true for Rebecca, is that they were labeled high risk. And technically I was labeled high risk because I was told that my son was not growing properly. That made me high risk. In fact, when I got to the hospital, they said, because you have this high risk status, you need to be on the monitor for 20 minutes. Now, back then, I did not know what I know now, which is that you can decline anything. Even if you're considered high risk, you can decline any intervention. And this is what Jenny did. Jenny had an unassisted vaginal birth after cesarean in the hospital. She showed up in labor about 1 hour before her baby was due to be born. Like she was just like ready. She was pushing basically in the car and she shows up and the nurse wants to do vaginal exams and Jenny says no. The nurse wants to try to take her blood pressure, but Jenny's already pushing a baby out, so that's not really working. The nurse wants to monitor the baby, but again, she can't get the baby's heart rate because the baby is in the birth canal. And then the last one, of course, is that she wanted to take Jenny's blood to do a blood test to get her blood type in case she needed a C-section as Jenny was pushing out her baby. And Jenny had everything going against her. She was 41. She had had a previous C-section. She had had a previous induction that had failed her. She happened to have chronic high blood pressure. She happened to have gestational diabetes. She even had group B strep. She had every single thing that would label her high risk, and she still managed to have an unassisted vaginal birth in the hospital. And she did it herself because she knew that she would have to do it herself because our health authority was not very supportive. If her doctor didn't get there in time, she knew that the nurses were going to freak out. But because of the tools that I've taught her on how to really sit with her truth and be able to breathe through those uncomfortable sensations of fear, she was able to quickly get back into her place of calm and birth her baby, even in the least ideal situation of a nurse refusing to call the doctor because she didn't believe that Jenny was actually pushing her baby out. She didn't believe that Jenny was serious when she's like, the baby is coming now. So again, when you have that high risk label, that's a trap. That's a trap. You need to really recognize what that means to you. And hey, if you do have a few complications, that doesn't rule you out from having a vaginal birth. The next one on the list is twins, because oftentimes this is a big fear. You find out, you go to the doctor and you get the ultrasound and there are 2 heartbeats. Oh shit, your birth plan just went completely out the window because how are you going to be able to birth 2 babies naturally? It's impossible. Your doctor is already scheduling a C-section. They're already saying that this is going to be a C-section and that they're going to take the babies early so that they can have the best possible chance on the outside. Well, guess what? I have seen twins being born at home. Oftentimes, this even happens by surprise. A mom will have planned a home birth. She may have either not chosen to have ultrasounds or the ultrasound didn't pick up the second baby. And then she pushes her first baby out. She thinks this is awesome. I'm just so elated. And then she's like, wait, there's another one. And it's a surprise twin home birth. I've also seen this happen where mom has had previous C-sections and she's on her way to the hospital and she births twins in her car. So again, if you are having twins, this does not mean that you have to have a C-section. And any doctor who automatically goes to twins, C-section, is not going to be the right fit for you. Because the truth is that you could have a vaginal birth. You could even have an unmedicated birth. You could have a home birth with twins. If that's what you want, there are resources out there that can help you. They're not widely advertised in mainstream. Because again, our culture is based on the fact that our bodies are defective and broken and that we need other people to tell us how we need to birth to make it safe. But the reality is that this is a physiological process. Your body knows what to do. So maybe twins might be a little bit riskier, but you know what? You are the one that can decide whether you want to take those risks and how likely those risks are actually going to be. Because again, it's all about the numbers. If you look at the actual numbers and then you compare the data from hospital to home, you start to see that, hey, maybe the things they did in the hospital contributed to that emergency. Whereas at home, where it was planned, where it was safe, where it was supported, this mom just birthed her babies unassisted, no problems. She might have wanted a midwife. We don't know. But sometimes what happens is because of the way that our medical system is, you find out you're having twins and suddenly it feels like the doors are just shut on you, on all of your options. And you feel pushed into a corner. And I am here to tell you that if you feel like you are pushed in the corner, that is not fair. That is really not fair that you have to choose between going completely unassisted versus getting pushed into a C-section in the hospital. It sucks. Believe me, I understand. Because as I said, I wanted my midwife there. I wanted my doula there. I missed out on having some beautiful home birth pictures of me in the pool with my daughter right after birth because I had to send everybody away just so that I could stay in my power and avoid getting pushed into a hospital birth. So I get it. You don't have to go unassisted if you don't want to. And there are care providers out there who can support that. In fact, I believe there's quite a few OBs out there, Dr. Stu being one of them, who can also support twins. and he has attended twin home births. And I think there's a few others as well. I've seen them. I've seen them out on social media. I've been following this stuff for 10 years. So all you have to do at any time is just ask me the questions like, hey, have you seen this? If I haven't, I guarantee you one of the doulas in my community has, because we see this stuff. We understand it. But you, being a mom who is in the mom communities, if you're getting just the mainstream education, you're not seeing it. And if you're just seeing what your care provider's options are for you, you're not seeing it. And if you're taking certain classes, you may not even know about this. So this is part of what I do with my clients is I help them find those loopholes so that they can get the birth they want, again, without having to fight, beg, or compromise. Okay, so we talked about twins, we talked about high risk, we talked about big baby and small baby. And number 5 is another really big cesarean trap. And it's another one that you find this out and you freak out because suddenly your birth plan looks like it's changing. Suddenly you're frantic to change things so that you can have a vaginal birth. I'm talking about breech birth. Well, for the longest time, I'm just going to tell you this used to be just a variation of normal. And doctors were able to attend breech. They had the skills. And sometimes there was a breech extraction, which I can tell you is not fun. And it's not what you want. But there were other care providers who understood that you have to keep your hands off the breech. You do not touch the breech baby. The breech baby will actually wiggle their way out on their own. In a physiological birth, when you are calm, you can actually have a breech baby. I've seen this too. In fact, I love breech birth. I think it's the most fascinating thing in the world because babies come out butt first just as easily as head first. And sometimes a mom who has had a baby that was head down the first time and breech the second time will say the breech was a lot easier. And they were really surprised at how much easier it was. But the thing is that back in the early 2000s, I believe it was like 1999 or 2000, someone decided to do something called a breech trial. And they did this study. And then at the end of the study, they concluded that a cesarean was safer than a vaginal breech delivery. Now, here's the problem with that. The study was very badly done, and they didn't take into account other variables. And in the end, I believe it was a Cochrane review, which is a review of all the data from all of the different studies, and they do like a meta-analysis of it. They concluded that that breech trial should just be thrown out. Here's the problem, is that it takes 17 years for a study to become common practice. And that breech trial led to a whole bunch of doctors suddenly no longer attending breech births. Suddenly everybody who was breech had to have a C-section. Suddenly breech was no longer being trained. It was just like automatic C-section. There was a lot of fear. And by the time they debunked this study, it was too late. Everything had changed in the culture. We now just automatically had this idea that breech was dangerous. And if you want to know an example of that, then look no further than some of the sitcoms from the 90s. In fact, if you have ever watched Friends, which was, I'm a millennial, so I grew up with Friends. But in one of the episodes, Rachel was having her baby, and the baby was breech. And that was not a C-section. She ended up birthing a breech baby. So breech used to be normal, and now it's not. Now, the second you're told that your baby might be breech, you freak out. Suddenly you're trying to get all of the spinning babies positions. You're trying to get your baby to flip. You're on the mom groups and you're saying, how do I get my baby to flip? And they're suggesting the external cephalic version, ECV, to have the baby turn. And then here's the thing about that though, is you usually have to have the epidural for it. because if it doesn't work and your baby goes into distress, it's an automatic C-section. And your care provider usually doesn't tell you that. In fact, I would suggest going to a chiropractor first if you really are committed to not having a breech baby. If you really don't want that, then you can do things that can help flip your baby. But I'm just going to tell you that sometimes babies are breech for a very good reason. And sometimes they need to come breech. So it's not a big deal if your baby does come feet first. It's really not. In fact, I see this all the time with home births, is that a mom will be like feeling like she's backed into a corner by her care provider, and her care provider says it's an automatic C-section. And mom is like, no, it's not. I'm not putting up with this. I am going to birth my baby breech. I'd like to have somebody assist me in case there's something that I need help with. But because nobody is helping me, I'm backed into a corner. So again, this is the same problem with these cesarean traps. This is why I talk about them. It's not just to avoid a C-section. It's not just to avoid an induction. It's not just to have a natural birth. The reason I talk about these traps is because when we recognize them, we can do something about them, and we can change the way that people are treated in their births. It's not just about you, and it's not just about me. Because you know what it's like when suddenly something changes in your plan and you feel like you have no options. You feel like you are being pushed into this direction you don't want to go. You don't want surgery. If you've already had a C-section, you don't want that again. You want to experience natural birth. You want to experience the power of your own body. You want to be able to prove that you can do it, but everybody around you is telling you that you can't. And it's so frustrating. And you're just looking on all of the forums, and you're on all of the mom groups, and you're reading all of the books, and you're just looking for that bit of information that will help you. But here's the thing, is that no amount of information is going to help you unless you get past your fear. And unfortunately, with the way that our culture is that it's ingrained into the system. And same with your care provider. They are ingrained into the system of fear. So I can tell you about these cesarean traps, and I want you to start paying attention when you're in the mom groups. In fact, I'm going to give you homework this week. Is that what I want you to do is the next time that you're in a mom group, which I guarantee you'll probably be in one, or if you're on TikTok or you're on Instagram or Facebook and you see a post about birth, I want you to look for those traps. I want you to see, is somebody talking about how they're afraid of a big baby? Is somebody talking about how the doctor's trying to push them into something because of a small baby? Is somebody being told that they're not able to have the birth they want because they're high risk? Is somebody being told they have to have a C-section because they have twins? Is somebody being told they have to have a C-section because of breech? See how prevalent it is. See what it actually brings up. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's the trick. The trick is that once you see these things, you are now awake in the sense that they can't pull the wool over your eyes anymore when it comes to your birth. You can start to question this. Okay, so that's your homework, is I want you to go and check that out. Go look for the next couple of days. Go check it out. See what traps come up. And if you see any more traps that I've mentioned before about natural birth traps, then hey, I would love to hear from you what you're spotting out there in the mom community. I can't be everywhere at once. So you can always send me a message, or you can put it inside of the Facebook group, because what I do is I collect all of those and then I put them in a nice list so that you can then recognize them. And then I teach content on it as well. So if you're loving these videos, please like, share, and subscribe on my YouTube channel. You can go to empoweringmomsbirth.com as well and check out my website where I have a bunch of resources. I'm creating a blog now, and follow me on all my social media channels at Empowering Moms Birth. All right, so that's all I have for you today, and I will see you next week. Talk to you soon.